Hello again, everybody. We are back. We are back talking about The Kite Runner by Khalid Hosseini. So we are going to start talking about what I think is maybe the easiest point of entry for this book, which is the characters. Now, there are four main characters in this book, basically. The first of them, the one we are introduced to immediately, of course, is Amir. Amir is at the start of the book, well, not the start of the book, but the start of his story, anyway. Amir is a young Pashtun boy living in Kabul, Afghanistan, with his father, Baba, whom we will talk about as well. And Amir is interesting. Amir is our narrator. He tells the story of the whole story to us. And we learn about Amir through his lens. I think that's really important anytime that you have a first-person story, especially if it is a first-person narrative that involves memory, the way that this does, because the book starts with Amir as an adult getting this phone call from a family friend, Rahim Khan, who says you have to come back to Afghanistan, and hinting that there is a way for Amir to be redeemed. And then it flashes back to when Amir was a boy. Amir was he grew up very wealthy. He grew up in as an only son to a very I want to say flexible, but maybe not flexible is the word. That's not the word I want to look for. A kind father. I think Baba was kind. But he had expectations for his boy. He wanted his boy to be manly, to be a soccer player, and Amir wanted to be a writer. And so one of the major sort of themes in this book is this constant tension between what father wants and what son wants. And that is another reason I love to teach this book to my students, is because my students are IB students, right? They're all smart and capable. And I guarantee that their parents' idea of what they should be doing and their idea of what they should be doing don't always match. And I try to find moments where I can encourage the kids to maybe think a little bit about that. Think a little bit about what your parents want and what you want, and how are you going to resolve that. Amir, as a narrator, is full of guilt because this is a redemption story. Amir allowed his best friend to be raped by a neighborhood boy. And on top of that, his best friend was the son of their family servant. So while Amir lived in the big house with all the stuff and the toys, and his father was able to get throw these huge parties with very famous people, his best friend was living in a mud hut behind the house and was a servant. And he never really, as a child, reconciled the fact that his best friend was also his servant. He couldn't see his friend Hassan as a human being when it was important for him to see him as a human being. When they were just playing, like, oh yeah, it was me and Hassan and we're having a great time. But when push came to shove, Amir instantly thought, like, okay, that boy is my servant, that boy is a Hazara, I am a Pashtun, I am I am my father's son. And he very, very easily pulled rank with his best friend Hassan, who Hassan was lovely, who's never really called him on it. And so as a real kind of jerk of a child, we see Amir make choices that we can understand, right? When Hassan is raped by Assef, which is the big moment in Act 1, if you will, and Amir runs away. Amir doesn't help him. Amir doesn't stop them. Amir doesn't even tell anyone what happened. Amir grabs his kite and runs away. And you have to remember that Amir was a child. And you have to kind of grant him a little bit of grace on that. That Hosseini is writing his main character's damage as damage done to a child. Not the same damage what was done to Hassan, certainly, but a child makes that decision. A child reacts in fear, and then that decision is what molds the entire rest of his life. That decision is what creates the person that he becomes, that he never really resolves, and he never gets to resolve because ultimately, eventually, Hassan dies. And so we get to watch Amir grow up with this sort of darkness in him, this fear of what he did and his inability to resolve it. And you kind of have to feel bad for him, Amir, as a child, because children can't resolve these things. They're children. We can't expect a child to be able to, by themselves, figure out, okay, what am I going to do about my sense of guilt for allowing my friend to be sexually assaulted? That's not a thing that a child should be able to do. But Amir kind of, as he turns into an adult, we can have a little bit less maybe forgiveness for him in a sense. But But yeah, he ends up going on this redemption quest as an adult. He's called back to Afghanistan to meet Rahim Khan, who's an old family friend, and to find Hassan's son. Hassan lived until he didn't, because when the Taliban took over Afghanistan, they killed a lot of the Hazara, and who is this sort of second-class ethnic group in Afghanistan at the time. And Hassan is killed. His son, however, survives, and if survive, you can call it. And his son is named Sorab. And when we meet Sorab, he is essentially a child prostitute to these high-ranking Taliban members. And it is unpleasant to see. It is very, very hard to read. You know this boy is dancing for these men in the Taliban, and then we know what happens to him later, that he's going to be taken away and he's going to be raped by them. And Amir, because Hosseini does love, sort of parallelism, Amir has to finally rescue his best friend's son from being the property of a rapist. And Sorab reacts much in the way we would expect a child survivor of sexual assault to react, is that he is very, very withdrawn. He doesn't quite know if it was his fault. At one point he says, I did a dirty thing, I'm going to hell, because he believes somehow this is his fault. And this is kind of Amir finally dealing with what happened to Hassan 20 years later, and trying to redeem himself by saving Hassan's son. Now, again, Amir is not entirely likable. When Amir is given the quest, right, if we put this into our proper sort of hero's journey, as it were, when Amir is given his quest, he refuses several times. He's like, why do I have to find this kid? I don't need to find this kid. Hey, I got money. I can use the money to help find this kid. And Rahim Khan has to say two things. Number one, the kid is Hassan's son. Number two, Hassan is your brother. Because yes, Amir's father, Baba, had been the father of Hassan. After his own wife died, he ended up impregnating his servant Ali's wife. And that child came out as Amir. And that then creates this another axis of incredible tension for Baba, who, as I said, as the father figure, he is very paternal. He is very patrician, maybe is the word I was looking for some time ago. He views himself as a role model of proper morality in this family. And one of the things that Baba says is that the worst crime you can ever commit is theft, and all crimes are basically theft. If you murder a person, that is the theft of their life and their future and their family's future with that person. If you lie to someone, you are stealing the truth from them. And Baba's very, very serious about this until you find out that he lied about who Hassan was. And so that adds a fun extra layer to Amir's memory of his dad, because by the time Amir finds out about this, his father is already dead. But you can go back when you read the book, once you know that Hassan is actually Amir's half-brother. You go back and read the book, and you can kind of look for those moments with Baba and see where he is struggling with the knowledge that not only does he have a son who is not of his wife, who is his servant's son, who he's treating like a servant. He's not even treating like a proper boy, but he's still trying to find moments to take care of this boy, to keep him in the household. He pays to have Hassan's hair lip fixed. He's trying desperately to do right by Hassan without ever acknowledging that Hassan is his boy. And so what you have, and another reason again why this book is fun to read, what you have are all of these sort of hidden motivations that aren't going to work together. So Amir is desperate to win his father's love. He really, really wants Baba to love him and to appreciate him, and he sees the one chance he really has is kite fighting, which is where the title of the novel comes from. And in the attempt to gain his father's love, he ends up sacrificing Hassan, who is the one that maybe his father might love more. You get the feeling that, Baba loves Amir, but you get the feeling he might like Hassan more because Hassan's a better person. And Hassan is just a wonderful little angel, and all Hassan wants is to be Amir's best friend. So this sort of trio of characters are caught in this very complicated web, which never really gets resolved because two of them die. Baba dies without telling the truth. Hassan dies without, I think, ever knowing the truth. And I don't think he ever finds out that Amir is his half brother. I might be wrong. It's been a little bit since I read it. If I am wrong, please correct me and forgive me, if you can. Standing on the outside of this little triangle, however, is Assef, who is our fourth major character in the book. And Assef is the villain of the story. Assef is the son of a very rich man in Kabul. Assef's father is Afghani, his mother is German, and Assef is a big fan of Hitler. Big fan of Hitler. He talks about how, mixed race mixing is the downfall of societies, while ignoring the fact that he is of two different races. He is constantly threatening Amir and Hassan. We see them first threaten while they're outside playing, and then, of course, the big moment when he ends up raping Hassan, because Hassan stood up to him once. And later in the book, we discover that Amir joined the Taliban because the Taliban would give him the chance to be as cruel as he wanted to be, and he really wants to be cruel. And he ends up saying to Amir, when Amir comes to rescue Sohrab, he says, "You can have the boy if you can defeat me." And a terrible, terrible fist fight breaks out, which is very well written. We'll get to that at some point. But yeah, Assef, and that's where Assef ends. We don't find out what happens to Assef after that. Sohrab takes out his slingshot and puts out his eye, which, great, good for him. He deserves it. But we don't find out what happens to Assef after that. But we don't really need to. And here's where we get to where I think the idea of the narrative filter is really important, that we need to remember that the person telling the story is Amir. And it's Amir reflecting through a lens of not only nostalgia and childhood, but also deep, 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 deep guilt. And so when we read the story, especially when we read the childhood section of the story, Hassan is perfect. Hassan is an angel. Hassan came out of his mother's womb smiling. Hassan never does anything wrong. Hassan never, when Amir gets him in trouble, Hassan never points the finger at Amir. And the discussion that I had with my students was, do you really think Hassan was really that good? Or is this Amir, in his guilty conscience, remembering Hassan as being perfectly good because he can't bear to think about what happened and what he had done? And so, again, we have to kind of keep the narrator in mind, and that goes for Assef as well. Assef is almost cartoonishly evil. He is a terrible child. He's a terrible person. Like I said, he admires Adolf Hitler. I think he gives Amir a biography of Hitler for his birthday, which nobody wants a biography of Hitler for their birthday. And again, when he grows up, he is not only he is the first time we see Assef as a grown-up, he is coordinating one of those big sort of stadium executions that would happen sometimes in Afghanistan, where people would be stoned to death in front of a big crowd. He is clearly a child rapist. He may have started with Hassan, but he certainly didn't stop with Hassan. And he is just awful, awful, awful in so many ways. And again, we have to ask ourselves, and I ask my students, do you really think Assef was truly as evil as he's being made out to be? Or is this the narrator's memory painting evil on him because Assef is the one who did the terrible thing that Amir didn't act on that ruined Amir's life? So I think that's worth examining. I think anytime you are reading a first-person point of view novel where it does go back in time, where it does explore memories, it is always worth wondering, okay, how true is this, right? Because our own memories are flawed and open to interpretation, and we misremember things all the time. And I think one of the things that Hosseini did in this book is to kind of utilize that, to take these two characters and make them extreme on either end, extremely good or extremely evil. Where he remembers his father is, of course, more complicated. He remembers his father as, again, this strong patrician man that he was always trying to impress, but never really able to impress until they got to America and Amir started writing, was able to kind of demonstrate to his father, sort of, or not demonstrate, sort of interact with his father as an adult on equal terms, more or less. And they were fine when Baba died. Their relationship had been resolved, but again, there was this big truth that Baba died without telling. And so I think it is worth going back then, as I said, going back and examining what Amir remembers or thinks he remembers, because he's telling this story after the fact, after he's already done all this stuff. He's gone to Afghanistan. He's learned all the truths. He'd come back with Sohrab. So yeah, the characters are great. We could talk about all of them forever, but I've been trying to keep these videos to like 15 to 20 minutes, so I don't want to talk about them all forever. There are other characters in there. Sohrab, who is Hassan's son, doesn't play a huge role, but he is really important because he becomes sort of the MacGuffin for Amir to gain some sense of redemption. And I want to point out that Amir's redemption is not like, say, a Darth Vader redemption, right? Where you do one good thing and then you get to die and you're like, hey, I did my one good thing. I've made up for this awful stuff I did. No. Hosseini makes it very clear that redemption is a process. Redemption is a journey, and it is a painful and difficult one. And we know by the end of the book, when Sohrab's been brought back to the United States and they're flying kites and he sees Sohrab smile for the first time in ages, that this is sort of the beginning of his true redemption and he becomes adult Amir becomes the kite runner for young Sohrab. This is the beginning of his journey where he's done the hard stuff, but there's more to come. He's going to redeem himself. We hope. His wife is Soraya. And his wife is interesting. She allows us to examine sort of the expatriate or Afghani diaspora in the United States, where these people who left when the Taliban came, who are expecting to one day return, are still kind of keeping a lot of Afghani traditions alive. And she is a way for Hosseini to at least discuss the plight of women in Afghanistan, or at least the women in Afghani culture, that they're expected to be perfect and pure until they're married off, and she's not. And she had been with a man before, and that was her big dark secret. But of course, Amir is kind and doesn't really care, and they get married anyway. Hooray! But Soraya is interesting, and she's not a big player, but she's there. She's always sort of there, especially when Sohrab is rescued, and Amir says, "I'm coming back with this boy," which is a tough ask for a spouse. Honestly, it's a very tough ask. And Rahim Khan is the other one I want to talk about. Rahim Khan is the one who really gets this whole story going, because one day Rahim Khan, who is Baba's best friend, who is ostensibly maybe a better father figure to Amir than Baba was, calls him up and says, "You have to come back to Afghanistan." He says, "There is a way to be good again." Rahim Khan knows. Rahim Khan knows everything. And he is the one who sort of sets that journey and this story going. And so, yeah, he's a little bit of a figure of mystery. He's kind of the Gandalf of the story in a sense. He shows up, he dumps a lot of information on Amir, and then he leaves, and he goes off to die somewhere. But he seems like a pretty decent guy. Does seem like the father that maybe Amir should have had, or at the very least should have maybe been able to bring Amir and his father together at one point. But anyway, this is one of the reasons I like the book. The characters are great. And there's not a ton of them. It's not a huge ensemble cast, but you start to look at how they relate to each other, and you start to ask yourself about, again, the truth of memory and how Amir remembers them versus how they really were. And you start to see how complicated and difficult these relationships were. And it adds a lot to the book. It makes the book much more interesting to read, especially if you've had maybe a difficult parent-child relationship. I haven't. My parents are wonderful. If they're watching this YouTube video, of course you're wonderful, Mom and Dad. They were. It's not just lip service. Don't worry. But yeah, if you've had a difficult parent-child relationship, you kind of look at this relationship between Amir and his father, and you understand that. So yeah, I think that Hosseini did a fine job of crafting his characters. They are people I'd like to talk about more, but trying to keep this to a reasonable length. So. That's it for now. I think we will continue with another topic later. If there's something you'd like to tell me about some of the characters you liked or didn't like, relationships which made sense or didn't make sense, put them in the comments. I would love to hear from you, and I will see you all next time.